Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. And as always, welcome to the show. And thank you. I really want to pause today. This is the last episode of the Grace and Grit podcast that you will hear in the year 2020. So I really want to pause and just express my sincere gratitude, especially to you longtime listeners. 2020 has challenged all of us in ways that we never could have expected. And as much as I hope that the podcast helped you to focus on what you could control this year, your love of the podcast and your commitment to doing the best you could, especially in these uncertain times, has helped me to stay focused. There were a lot of days over the past 9 months where I wasn't quite sure that I could handle homeschooling a 10-year-old, running a full-time coaching business, and keeping this podcast alive. But reading your emails, reading your reviews, reading your comments inside the Women of Grace and Grit Facebook group, and talking to many of you is truly what made me dig deeper than I might have otherwise. And I gotta tell you, I am stronger on the other side of it for it. So thank you. Thank you for choosing this show to be in your ears. Thank you for your efforts to take better care of yourself so you can show up in all the spaces and places of your life as a confident and resilient human. You inspire me, and I am so incredibly grateful for you. Now, if you're not in the Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community, and you're not on my email list, you may have missed the announcement that I made over the past few days that January 4th through January 8th, I am hosting a free online event called Healthiest Year Yet. So you can start 2021 feeling grounded, capable, and resilient in the face of whatever the new year has in store for you. My team and I have been working very hard at putting together a powerful experience for those of you who are interested in participating, and I really hope that you're one of them. So you can register for this event by going to graceandgrit.com/healthiest year yet. Once again, graceandgrit.com/healthiest year yet. And feel free to invite any women in your life who you know could use a mindset reset when it comes to their health. Because we are going to go deep into priming your head to make next year one of your healthiest years yet. Now, over the past 4 weeks, we have covered a lot of ground on the topic of the basics of fat loss. So I've done a 4 to 5 week series. I say 2-5 because there was episode 217, I would say was definitely a part of this series. And I want to tell you that I felt compelled to do this series about the basics of fat loss, not because I think fat loss is something that everyone needs to focus on, nor do I think that it is the most important piece of the health equation, which I really hope I made clear in the first few episodes of the series. But the reason I decided to make this series is because it pains me to see the insanity that women are buying into in an effort to lose fat. And let's be honest, most women are not trying to lose fat, they're trying to lose weight. And I spoke to that pretty heartily in episode 217. But if at any point along your health journey, you decide that you want to focus on fat loss, I hope you will refer back to this series to help you do it in a healthy and sustainable way. So the road we've traveled over the past 4 weeks has been this. We talked about a lot of misconceptions surrounding the fat loss conversation in episode 219. And specifically, I talked a lot about why weight loss is not fat loss. We talked about the importance of beginning your fat loss journey in a mentally healthy place. So I introduced the fat loss trifecta, and mental health is the very first component of that. We talked about the importance of healing and fortifying your body to promote hormonal health before you start doing things that are more aggressive and potentially distressing to the human body. And then last week, I finally started in on the part of the conversation that the diet and fitness industry seems to be so hyper-focused on, which was I started to talk about tips for accelerating fat loss. But notice how much groundwork we laid before we got to that conversation. And that is something largely I'm not seeing enough of at all in the diet and even fitness world. We're not laying the groundwork. We're just jumping to the really difficult parts because people are in such a hurry to get there. And as I've said many, many times over the past 4 to 5 weeks, the more of a hurry you are in to create a result, the less likely you are to sustain it. You have to lay the proper foundation. So today, to wrap up this series, I just want to address some questions that have been asked. And these are a lot of frequently asked questions. So I tried to pick the questions that I thought would be relevant to a lot of people. So the first question I want to address is, how do you measure body fat? Because we talked a lot about the scale. And please don't hear me saying that I'm for or against the scale, because I'm neither. I think the scale, like anything, is a tool that when used by the right person for the right reason can be useful. But why you're using it and how you're interpreting that information is everything. But we all need to be very honest that the scale is not telling you anything about the state of your health. It's simply telling you your relationship to gravity. So if you truly want to know more about the state of your health, you've got to use different forms of measurement. And so we talked a little bit in an earlier episode about the importance of body composition testing. And what a body comp test is it basically tells you what your total weight is made up of in terms of muscle mass, fat mass, bone, water, which all your tissues are made up of. So it can give you a lot more insight into the health of your body. And remember what I said early on as well, you can be a very thin individual and still be metabolically obese. So don't kid yourself that if you weigh the same that you did in high school, that just by virtue of that number, you're a healthy individual. It's not how it works. And a body composition test can give you a lot more insight. So when we talk about body fat testing, we're really talking about methods for understanding body composition. So there's a lot of ways to measure body fat, from hydrostatic testing to DEXA scans to bioelectrical impedance testing to caliper testing. And there's a lot of things in between all of that. And what I think is most important when it comes to testing is that you use the same method as you are going through your fat loss process. Because if you bounce from method to method to method, you are going to drive yourself crazy. And I'm going to speak specifically to some of the most well-known types of body fat testing here, just so you kind of have an understanding of what those things are, what's available to you. And I have used a lot of these tests over the years with clients. And I got to tell you, of course, there are certain tests that are more accurate than others. That being said, all of the body fat test measurements that I'm about to go through here have worked for fat loss. They have given people enough information to track their progress over a period of time. So while you could think that you have to go for the most expensive and most accurate test, I just want you to hear that I don't think that's necessary. I think using the same method during your process is really what matters. It's kind of like if you're ever going to look at the energy you're consuming in terms of calories. Calorie counting is not a perfect science, not by a long shot, but it works because we pay more attention to what we're consuming and we better understand what our food is made up of. And that's kind of how I look at body fat testing. So one of the cheapest and most accessible forms of body fat testing, and kind of, I would say, one of the more, I don't want to say archaic, if that's the right word, but maybe outdated forms of testing is caliper testing. Caliper testing is the pinch test, right? That's what a lot of you know it as. And, and compared to a lot of the other tests I'm going to mention here, caliper testing is probably one of the most inaccurate forms of body fat testing, in that there's a ton of room for error because it really depends on the skill of the person testing it. So it can be super helpful, super useful. I used caliper testing for years. We're talking like almost a decade, and it worked really well. But I was also really well practiced in the art of caliper testing. And I don't know that that's true. I would argue that's probably not true for a lot of people who are using that test. So caliper testing is only really measuring subcutaneous fat. And then by plugging that percentage into an equation, you're kind of guesstimating the total body fat percentage. But the positive is that it's super cheap. It can be done at home. But the con is that it takes practice. There's a lot of room for error. And it's an estimation. You're estimating the percentage of total body fat based on the subcutaneous fat, which is the superficial fat layer over your muscle tissue. Now, something I would say is kind of like a polar opposite to that would be hydrostatic testing. So hydrostatic testing is an underwater weighing method, and it's kind of regarded as the gold standard for body comp measurement. Well, at least it used to be. There's some controversy around that now with the advent of some new testing that we'll talk about here in a second. But the challenge with hydrostatic testing, as you can imagine, is it needs to be done in a special facility because you're literally going underwater. You have to be submerged in water. You have to expire as much breath from your body as possible because the basic principle of hydrostatic testing is that fat floats, right? So there's a lot of inconvenience to this form of testing, and it's expensive because you're having to do it in a specialized facility with specialized equipment. So it's really not a reasonable option for most people. Now, there's a more recent, and I would say recent within, I don't even know when the bod pod was invented, but it's been around for a while. And the bod pod uses air displacement technology, which is considered, again, kind of like hydrostatic testing, a gold standard of body composition measurement. And it really is as accurate as hydrostatic weighing, but you don't have to get wet. It only takes a few minutes. So it's much quicker and easier to perform. And, again, most people are not going to have access to something like this in their home, but you could look up the bod pod, just Google it, and you could probably get a reference page of where you can go to get tested in your area. So that's something that's becoming more popular and, again, has a high degree of accuracy. The other thing that you're going to see, you see a lot of more these days, even in scales that people have at their homes, is a form of testing called bioelectrical impedance. And bioelectrical impedance testing is really one of the cheapest and most accessible forms of ways to measure body comp, because it's a method based on a rate at which an electrical current travels through the body. Now, that sounds crazy, right? It sounds like, God, why would I want an electrical current to travel through my body? But you don't feel it, right? It's a very simple test. You stand on a scale. Depending on the device you're using, you would hold handles or you would have little electrodes attached to your body. It's, like I said, it's cheap, and it's the accuracy is a little controversial. So this is one of the cons to the test. And it's controversial because it largely depends on the hydration of the tissues. So if you're super dehydrated or overhydrated, you're going to get a different reading on the test. But this is what you see in like a lot of bathroom scales that are sold now that tell you a percentage of body fat. They're using bioelectrical impedance to give you that number. So it's not as highly accurate as something like hydrostatic testing or the bod pod. But like I said earlier, I think it gives you enough information to get a good assessment of the trend of your body fat. So, and again, cheap, accessible, which is what I think a lot of people need when it comes to knowing body fat. You can also do something like a DEXA scan. So a DEXA scan is an X-ray, right? It works by sending a low X-ray beam through the body that kind of measures the two compositions within your body, meaning lean mass to fat mass, and also bone density. Of course, a lot of people know a DEXA scan is a bone density test. It's very highly accurate, but you're being exposed to X-rays. It's expensive, and it's not very convenient. I've had clients do DEXA scans for sure, but they were in a position where they were either getting a bone density test anyway, or they were on the more athletic side, and knowing their exact body fat percentage was a lot more important than just sort of the average woman. So it can be done for sure, but you have to have it done in a medical facility, and it's just not super convenient. So the next question that comes on the back of this, and of course, those are not all of the methods, those are just some of the most popular ones. But the next question that comes on the back of this is, how often should I get my body fat tested? And truth be told, ladies, I think if you get your body fat tested too often, you're going to be so discouraged, because body fat is very slow to change. But the other thing to remember is that 1% of body fat is the equivalent of multiple pounds of weight. So I've had women go get body fat testing, and let's just say their first test, their body fat percentage was at 35%, and that they go back, 4 to 6 weeks later, and their body fat percentage is now 33%. They can get really deflated about that number because, of course, they're expecting like 25%. But just losing 2% body fat, depending on your total weight, could be the equivalent of 5, 10, even more pounds than that. So I think that you're going to play a lot of head games with yourself if you're getting body fat tested more often than like 6 to 8 to 12 weeks. So that's my recommendation for my clients, because I want them to stay in a mentally healthy place. And I know that percentage is slow to change, and I just don't want it to mess with their head. So that's what I suggest. What is a healthy body fat percentage for women? We talked about this early on in one of the earlier episodes, but the American College of Sports Medicine recommends 20% to 32%. Now, that's not to say there can't be outliers, right? The more athletic a woman is, of course, her body fat percentage could be significantly lower than 20%. But again, when we're talking about the average population, 20 to 32% is really within the healthy range of how much fat mass is a healthy amount on the human body. And this also depends on our age. So the older we are, the more likely it is that the higher our body fat percentage is. So if you're a woman in your 50s or 60s, having a body fat percentage closer to like that 28 to 32% mark is certainly reasonable. So I hope that helps some of you to sort of wrap your head around that. Another question that I get a lot and that I was asked a few times within the past couple of weeks is, can I build muscle and lose fat at the same time? And this is kind of a complicated question, but the way that I want to break it down is just for you to remember that muscle is a building process. It is a building of tissue. And building of tissue requires high nutritional density and a surplus of calories. We're literally trying to build mass. Where fat loss is a breaking down process, a process of losing mass. So we really need a deficit in calories. So they're not the same process. They don't require the same things. And I think what you want to remember is that when you are in a fat loss process, you are not building muscle, but what you are working towards is preserving as much muscle as possible on your body. Because anytime you are in a deficit, a calorie deficit, and you are in the process of losing fat, you are running the risk of losing muscle tissue. And muscle tissue is so stinking important. So we want to preserve as much as we possibly can. You're always at risk of losing a little bit, but with, doing with regular strength training, eating enough protein, eating enough total calories, not going into too extreme of a deficit too quickly, you will be preserving your muscle. So then, of course, the next question I often get in relationship to this is, well, if I can't really build my muscle and lose fat at the same time, which one do I promote first? And this is a very loaded question. So it is very metabolically advantageous to you to promote muscle health first. And I talked a lot about this in, I think it was episode 2 of the series, when we were talking about healing and fortifying the body. Muscle is so metabolically advantageous, meaning the healthier your muscle tissue is, the more, your metabolic processes will function more optimally. And remember, all metabolic process is how efficiently your cells work and do their jobs. Muscle is also very metabolically active. We burn more energy when we have more muscle on our body. So I am of the school of thought that it is much healthier to focus first and foremost on promoting muscle tissue, the growth of it, the health of it, before you start going into a fat loss process. I will tell you, most people don't have the patience for that. And this is where a lot of, if I coach a woman through fat loss, this is where a lot of coaching happens. Because a woman is usually so eager to lose fat, she doesn't want to spend the time doing it properly. She doesn't want to spend time promoting the health of her muscle tissue, building muscle tissue. And she's so eager to get to the fat loss part, she can get really frustrated in that initial phase. But I can't tell you how beneficial it is to heal and fortify muscle tissue before you promote fat loss. And this is why women get frustrated. You may not lose weight in that initial stage, right? When you are lifting weights and you haven't been lifting weights and you're eating more protein, you might even be eating more carbohydrates, right? Depending on where you started calorically. All of that is probably going to show up as either maintaining weight on the scale or even slightly gaining weight. But does that mean that you're gaining fat? Absolutely not. Muscle is a very dense tissue. Carbohydrates require more water than protein and fat. And when you understand these things, it's kind of easier to accept when you're in that phase of building and fortifying muscle tissue that you may not be losing weight. And specifically, I'm speaking about fat, right? And it's not even that you're not losing fat, right? Because you may be, but you may not be seeing it on the scale because those tissues, one is getting healthier and you're losing fat mass. Because there is a small degree of those two processes happening simultaneously. But when we're talking about real proper muscle growth and real fat loss, they are separate processes. I hope that makes sense. That sounded a little confusing as I said it. But so the goal is, again, to preserve as much muscle mass as you possibly can when you're going into a fat loss process. So it is worth the while to take care of your muscle health before you go into a fat loss process. And I will tell you that I've seen a lot of women do the opposite. A lot of women will lose a tremendous amount of weight. This is what the diet industry teaches. It's all about weight loss, right? So women go on some extreme fad diet, they lose a bunch of weight, and then they realize that they're not strong. They don't necessarily look toned, which, ladies, all being toned means is that you have muscle, right? And so then they want to start building muscle. And here's the challenge with that. When you've lost a lot of weight and you're kind of at your goal weight, whatever that number is, and then you want to start promoting muscle building, that is very psychologically difficult for a lot of women, because guess what's going to happen when you start promoting muscle mass? Your weight's going to go up. So again, you can promote muscle mass first before you go into a fat loss process, or you could focus on fat loss and do the muscle promoting later, but I don't recommend the latter for so many reasons. It messes with your head. It's not as metabolically advantageous for the body. So personally, I would take the time to promote muscle before losing fat. Another question I get is how much should I be eating, right? Well, this depends on so many things. It depends on your age. It depends on your weight. It depends on your body composition, what that weight is made up of. It depends on your activity level. It depends on the foods that you're eating, so many things. But I will tell you that if you want to get kind of a general sense of the amount of calories you should be eating for whatever goal you have, you may want to go, I always like using Precision Nutrition's calculator. There's a lot of other calculators that you could use online that will, based on the information that you put into the database, it will give you a number. But Precision Nutrition's, I trust. So that may be one that you want to kind of go look at. But I will tell you that most women need to be eating more than they think. And this I can just say through loads of experience, that when I look at what a woman is currently eating, it is usually so low and so under even her basal metabolic needs, which is just kind of what your body requires to keep you alive. And it's very stressful to the human body. So I encourage her to start, again, healing and fortifying her system by eating more nutrient-dense food. And of course, over time, her body starts to do beautiful things because her hormonal system is working a little bit better. Her muscle mass is healthier. So plug it into a calculator if you need more information on that, because I think it can be a big eye-opener for you. How many times a day should I eat? Well, it really depends on who you are, right? But I will say in general, you want to eat enough to stabilize blood sugar, and you want to eat frequently enough to feel in control around food. And this is really an experiment, right? It's different for everybody. Personally, I have to eat fairly often. Like I eat every 3 to 4 hours because that's what it requires for me to stabilize my blood sugar. And that's where I feel good. I have good energy. My energy is sustainable throughout the day. That's just what I've learned about myself. I have other clients who eat 3 square meals a day, right? There are some people I have worked with who don't eat for the first however many hours of the day, and then they'll eat the bulk of their food between noon and 8 o'clock at night, and that works for them. So be willing to experiment and stay really honest with yourself. Because what I see a lot of women saying when they initially work with me is, I don't like breakfast. And then what happens when they don't eat breakfast is they're out of control around food come lunchtime because their blood sugar is so low. So when we start getting them to eat a little earlier in the day and more consistently throughout the day, they feel more in control around food. So be honest with yourself if it's working or not in terms of stabilizing blood sugar. Let's see. One of the comments I got was, I'm doing everything right and nothing works. I have never found this to be true, right? This is not a true statement. You have not tried everything, and it's not true that nothing works. When women come in to work with me and have that mindset, the first thing I'm going to focus on is mindset. Because ladies, that thought, I'm doing everything right and nothing works, is a dangerous thought. And why? Because your brain loves to prove itself right. Whatever you think is what you are going to look for evidence for. So when you are constantly telling yourself that nothing works, you are going to look for all the reasons why nothing works. And more importantly, you're going to behave in a way that ensures that nothing works. When we start tracking data, right, pen to page, what you're actually doing, I have rarely not seen gaps where a woman could improve. And that is true of myself as well, by the way, right? When I'm feeling out of sorts with my own body and I put pen to page to start getting really accountable about what I'm truly doing, it gets so much easier to start to see where I can improve. And when I have clients track their behavior, I have to tell you, there's always gaps. There's always places that can be improved. There's always things that we can try on. So I'm doing everything right and nothing works. Number one, I don't think it's a true statement. I rarely see that a woman is doing everything right because it's really hard to do that. It's really hard to do everything right. And the part about it, nothing works, is only going to make sure that nothing works for you. So careful of those. The other thing I want to address is, can I drink alcohol and lose fat? Because I know this comes up a lot. And the short answer is yes, you can drink alcohol and lose fat. However, your fat loss process will be so much slower. And it's important for you to know because alcohol affects fat metabolism. Your liver is the primary metabolizer of fat. And when you consume alcohol, it goes straight into your bloodstream. And your liver, which has so many jobs to do, has to process that alcohol. It has to prioritize getting alcohol out of your system above all else. So if you are in a space of metabolizing fat in your liver will put that process on hold to deal with the alcohol that has come in. So you're putting one more step ahead of fat metabolism. You're making it harder on your body. You're making the process much slower. And truth be told, if you don't have a healthy liver to begin with, you're making it really hard for your body, right? Because again, you're giving your liver one more job to do. So can I drink alcohol and lose fat? Again, short answer is yes. Do I recommend it? Definitely not. Because, and ladies especially, as we age, even if we ever metabolized something like alcohol well, which I would argue a lot of people don't, we definitely don't metabolize alcohol as well as we age. So a lot of women in their 40s and 50s were already contending with so many hormonal challenges. And consuming alcohol is just contributing to that disruption. It's not helping to make it easier. So I don't think alcohol is in any way helping your process. And most certainly, it's throwing some unnecessary challenges into your process. So that's it. Those are the questions I'm going to address for today. Again, this entire series was really intended to focus on the basics of fat loss. So I hope it helped you to kind of get just a general overview. of how to tackle your fat loss process in a healthier and more sustainable way, if that's something you're even focusing on, which again, not everybody is. I want once again to invite you to the Healthiest Year Yet event that is running January 4th through January 8th. It will be 5 days of video lessons and coaching with me directly. And really the purpose of this event is to get your mind primed to make 2021 your healthiest year yet. This is not a fitness challenge. It's not a detox or a diet. It's an event to help you get straight with yourself about what you want, what you need to do to attain that, and how to start showing up for yourself with more consistency and ease. It's really, I feel like more than anything, it's a mindset reset. And I know a lot of people could use that at the end of 2020. So this is me signing off for 2020. I hope you get a lot of rest over the holidays. I hope you give yourself permission to restore. I hope you love hard on yourself and on the people around you. Even though that circle might be a little smaller than past years because of COVID, I hope that you treat yourself with kindness. I hope you treat others with kindness. And once again, I just want to express my very sincere gratitude for your listenership, for your support of the podcast. And I cannot wait to continue working with you in 2021. I'll see you soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.